I'm afraid I neglected my licenses along the way, but I ended up working on a lot of square riggers and schooners and traditional ships, and occasionally doing a delivery on a steamer. My father was a steam engineer originally, and he loved steam. So whenever an insurance company would call, and my father was ashore for a while, he liked to come ashore and play golf with my mother, and go bowling and so forth. And he was of the age where he could get away with doing that. And he would take on these jobs for delivering old steam yachts. Insurance companies loved him because he had a good license. He didn't drink, and well, at least he didn't drink very publicly. And so I got a chance to even spend some time on this steam. And I was the city of Baltimore's maritime historian for a time. And, but my ambition was always to come back to Maine. My people have been in Maine for almost 400 years. And it's just something, I guess, even when I was away and traveling in strange places, I always thought of Maine, always thought of coming home. So I've been back here for a while. A good woman, I brought a good woman with me.
Thank you.
Nice girl from Baltimore. If there are nice girls in Baltimore.
You've been hearing about that one on the right,
huh? She is very protective of Baltimore. And, I understand. I have no complaints about Baltimore. It was a great place for me. I was supposed to be there for 1 year, and I was asked to stay a second year, and in the meantime met Sharon, and I ended up spending most of 20 years there. So obviously it's not too bad a place, because I wouldn't stay there that long.
And they loved him. They really did, for the most part.
It was a good town. It was at a nice time, because it was a time when the bicentennial was on, and the Operation Sail thing was coming into Baltimore in a big way. And Baltimore and Maryland really spent a lot of money on welcoming these big square riggers, these big ships in. And I had sailed a couple of them, which was kind of fun because a lot of old friends were there. I had sailed on the Artemis of Rotterdam, which was the last large wooden sailing ship listed by Lloyd's of London carrying cargo. And it was built for a crew of 21 men. We had a crew of 4. So we worked plenty, but it was a good time, and Baltimore really showed me a good time, I'll tell you. So I don't have a lot of complaints, but I did want to get back to Maine, which, as you can see, ultimately I did. I got involved in historical stuff just because I loved history. My grandmother was born in 1863, and my grandfather, who was a well-known sea captain here in Maine from South Gouldsboro, he was born in 1851. I never knew him, but I knew my grandmother very well. And she had been to sea with her husband, which was common in those days. So she was full of history. She knew Ralph Waldo Emerson, and she knew she was from away. She was from Concord, Mass. And she was a foreigner. but she was her father was good friends with Henry Thoreau, and so she was just full of history, and it just fired my imagination. And every holiday when other kids were getting toys and things, I was given a book, and so I did a lot of reading, and then managed to get overseas a number of times and saw strange, wonderful historic places. Was kind of raised with it, so this is the result. I'm not a collector. I've always been a dealer, most of which I've owned over the years. I've sold. I was a painter, and I was a merchant seaman, and I was an antiquarian. And those are the 3 ways that I actually made a living. So now that I no longer have a shop, I have a shop here in Portland for some time. Some of you know it, and I miss the business. The biggest mistake I ever made was to get out of the shop. I was going to do everything in my barn in gray, and business in gray is a little different. But in any event, I've still got a lot of stuff, and I'm always coming across them. And one of the things that is rarest among maritime collectors and dealers are navigational instruments. And I suspect most of us in the room here have had to learn celestial, at least to some degree. Maybe you never used it, but if you went to Maine Maritime, or you went to Mass Maritime, or any of the academies, back a few years ago, they were still featured in that. And a lot of you probably will never have to use it, but it's part of our tradition. When I would get in Baltimore, we would get a lot of young cadets from the Naval Academy in Annapolis. Would come up to Baltimore and misbehave, and they would stop by my shop, and they'd laugh at the shrunken heads and the weird things that I had in the shop. But one day I saw a bunch of them looking at a case, and I always kept 4 or 5 sextants, decent sextants, Mark IIs and Tamayas and so forth. And I didn't have a big business in it in Baltimore, but people would call me for them, you know. And I had these in a case, and these guys were kind of laughing. And I went over to see what they were laughing about. And they were laughing about how they used to have to learn this stuff, but they didn't have to learn it anymore because now everything was in a little box this big that was electric, and they didn't have to worry about it. And it kind of pissed me off a little bit because, you know, I know that most of us will never need to use a sextant again. But you know, there is something in being a merchant seaman, being a mariner, of having that kind of skill. It's just something you take pride in. It's something that in my father's generation and my father's father's generation was necessary. And it may not be as necessary today, but it's a nice skill to have. So I've got a little bit of the history of those instruments here. And I'll start with that is a quadrant. You would have a string that would hang down here and a little plumb bob, and you'd line up the edge and take the reading off, and that was supposed to be the way you're going to find your way around the oceans. And we laugh at it today. I don't even know how old this is. This is a very old piece. It could be anywhere from, well, the earliest ones that we know of are from the 1300s. They didn't really become popular in Western Europe until about 1450. And they were still using them. And in fact, in places like North Africa, they used them right up into the early years of the 20th century. But this is what they had, and it was the basis. It becomes the basis for our sextant today. So that was referred to as a quadrant. And you'll still hear people talk about their old octant or whatever as a quadrant. It's a term that a lot of people have just, a popular term that they still use, but they obviously don't use them anymore.
What's it made of, Steve?
This one is, it's wood faced in brass. Yeah, it's brass sheet, and you'll see there are some little nails in it. The nails are rusty now, so they don't show up as well. But if you get examining it, you'll see there's nail heads. Those nail heads are all critical stars. One of the ways you can determine where this was made was by looking at the formations, and you'll find out what was most important to them. And I think I've worked out where this one is probably from the Mediterranean, but we don't know.
Okay.
The Italians were still using them until the earlier 1600s, and that was replaced with this. This is a mariner's astrolabe. These are extremely rare. The number of these that exist in the world today are under 100 probably. This one, it's probably Portuguese. Most of them are Portuguese. The Portuguese are the ones that mastered it. Columbus used one. Vasco da Gama had one. All the great mariners in those days who were in the age of exploration were using the astrolabe. The astrolabe, it's heavy for a reason. One of the things about it, you want one that's heavy, particularly on the bottom, because when you're taking your observations on the deck of a rolling ship, you want the piece to be gimbaled, and you're the one that's gimbaled, you're actually moving, and as long as this is heavy, this will stay upright, and the observations that you're making will be relatively true. There are a number of ways of using it, but these were originally invented by the Arabs, and were used for much more the Arab pieces are much